I'm Bryony. I live in two off-grid tiny houses and I'm thinking about buying a third. Let's talk. Hey friends. So if you watched the last video, you would know that I currently live in two off-grid tiny houses. I'm thinking about buying a third and moving away from the beautiful country property that I'm on in country Victoria and moving to the beach. And I've been umming and ahhing about whether I should sell my current house. Do I buy a new one? What do I do? Is this even going to be possible for me? So I kind of wanted to walk you through my thought process on the decision. So the first part of that, the considerations here for me are, if I move my current tiny house, whether I use my current one or whether I buy a new one, will I have somewhere to put it if and when I move? The Bellarine Peninsula is a tricky one. It's neither legal nor illegal to live in a tiny house there. I don't know anyone else that's down there living in a tiny house at the moment. And I actually got in touch with a friend a couple of days ago who told me that she'd considered moving down there in her tiny house a year or two ago and had put the call out in local Facebook groups and got crickets and got a lot of backlash for wanting to do so. You know, trailer trash, living illegally, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't well received. So she gave up and she ended up moving to a spot on the property her relatives own in Ballarat, just up the road from me in Victoria, which was not reassuring. However, I have had a look in some of the Facebook groups in the local area that I'd be looking to go recently, and there have been a couple of people posting that live in buses and things like that looking for land. Obviously, this is 2 years after when my friend was initially looking, but the reactions have been far more positive. And from the edits that they've added to their posts a week or so later, it looks like they've actually had lots of interest, lots of messages, and they've actually found somewhere. So step one, check. I would most likely be able to find somewhere. Plus, I also happen to run a little land matching service called Park My Tiny House. And it probably would be a really good experiment to walk the talk and find land using my own service, right? My next consideration is which house, what house would I take and want to move in down there? I currently have two tiny houses. So the main one for my son and I, which is 6 meters with the bathroom and kitchen, a smaller 3.5 meter pod that has belonged to my 18-year-old daughter. My main house, it's pretty basic. The layout's not perfect. Look, it's worked for me for 5 years, but there are things that really irk me in terms of the storage. There's nowhere to put my shoes. There's no like fixed dining table at the moment. And the kitchen is really what you would call a kitchenette. It's really quite small, which means I eat out a lot, which means I spend a lot on food and dining, which is probably not ideal. And I do need to be a little bit healthier. It's not fixed to my property. It is on wheels because, as you can see here behind me, I've got a deck and everything set up on the property next to it. It is on wheels and it could move, but I don't know. I think it might be time for an upgrade. The other option is I do have a caravan currently. Now, it's not the same Breaking Bad style RV that I initially moved into 5 or 6 years ago when I was really, really struggling financially. It's a much, much nicer one. It doesn't have a bathroom though. So I would have to have like an external shower bathroom situation, which worked okay when we initially moved into that caravan because we had no other choice. But I live in a nice house that has a nice bathroom and kitchen and everything now. Moving to the caravan would feel like a backward step, and probably I'm a little bit traumatized about living in a caravan after having to do it before. I'm all about taking a little bit of a backward step to make one leap forwards, but yeah, I don't think I want to live in a caravan again. I want something that feels like a step up from where I am now. I've worked so bloody hard on business and doing well, I guess, at this life and becoming what I hope is kind of an important part of the industry moving forward, that I feel like not that you need to work hard to earn or deserve things, but I feel like I'm ready to up level in a lot of ways. And I don't think I can do that with my current house or if I take the caravan with me. So I think I'd be looking at a new house. Ugh, it's getting a bit sunny there, had to move. So what are my options really? I guess I'm looking at buying a new house. When I bought my house originally, my 6 meter house back in 2018, I got mine for the bargain price of $35,000. It was still is, a very basic DIY build that was not really built to any standards or anything as such. Things have changed a lot in the last 2 years. Build prices have gone through the roof as a result of building materials shortages. Like, a lot of building materials have doubled in price. I've seen the builder's invoices, so I can account for this one. Any house that I buy now is going to be substantially more than that. So given that the average tiny house is maybe 120 to 150, how am I going to fund this thing? Bank of Mum and Dad is just not even an option for something of this kind of breadth. I don't know whether I would be able to get a loan for that. And I don't really want to be in debt. What are my other options? So I've had a really good conversation with my mate Paul from Great Escape Finance. They're the industry experts in all things tiny house finance related. And I've come up with a couple of options that may be a possibility for me. And I do preface this conversation with, this is absolutely not financial advice in any way, shape or form. This is just a private conversation that Paul and I had regarding my personal circumstances and some of the options that might have been available to me. So in my situation at the moment, I am really proud to say that I'm debt-free for my current tiny house and the property that I have here. The plus side of that is I may be able to leverage that. Yes, that means borrowing money. I could potentially get a mortgage against my current property and do what's called cash out, which means effectively I could turn my current property into an investment property and borrow money against it to get the cash to buy my tiny house, if that makes sense. The value of my property means that I would be very close to being able to do that. And even if the mortgage won't stretch based on the value of my land to the full amount I would need to buy the tiny house for, I may be able to add a small amount of that in a personal loan to make up the shortfall. And my overall weekly, fortnightly repayments, etc., would be possibly very similar to what I could actually rent my tiny house at if I rent my current place out to a full-time tenant, which, if you've been following me for any length of time, you would know I'm really passionate about providing housing solutions. Given my history and where I've come from and the difficulties I've faced in the last 5 or 6 years, I would love to see someone maybe live in my house that might be now where I was 6 years ago, that I could help out by providing a tiny house for rent, because no one's really doing that in an affordable way in a little country town where there are very few rentals. I've checked the rentals in the area and there hasn't been one listed in at least 3 or 4 months. And when they do get listed, they get snapped up quickly. So renting out my current place and using that to pay a mortgage is kind of promising. There's another option available to me that I was unaware of, which might be to use my super fund sort of in a roundabout kind of way to buy my tiny house. Let me try and explain this. Again, not financial advice. Please speak to an expert. Big asterisk. I currently have around about 6 figures in my super fund. Currently doing, okay-ish, but not doing a lot. I could actually turn that into a self-managed super fund. And what would happen is my self-managed super fund would effectively buy my current property off me and give me the cash. And then I would use that cash to buy my tiny house. There are quite a few asterisks I have discovered with doing this. One is that my current property would have to be used for investment purposes. So I would have to have a tenant in there, which is the same thing I'd be doing anyway if I remortgaged it to pay my mortgage. So that's 6.5 a dozen. But the other thing is that I have the remains of a 150-year-old miner's cottage on my property here. I would love to do that up at some point in the future, probably distant future, once I'm in a better financial situation. Apparently, it sounds like if your property is under a self-managed super fund, you can't make any major capital improvements to the property, which is what rebuilding an entire 150-year-old miner's cottage would be. You can do minor renovations and cosmetic stuff to any house that's on the property currently, but I couldn't do something big like rebuild the cottage. That's important to me. I feel very privileged to be a custodian, I guess, of the land that I currently own here. And I want to have the option of renovating, fixing up this cottage and making it an important piece of restored history in the local area. So that kind of rules out the self-managed super fund, which is sad because that seemed like the simplest non-debt way that I could get into a new tiny house. So at this stage, it's looking like my best possible option is actually going to be to leverage. Rich people call it leverage, broke people call it remortgage, I'm told, to leverage my current property and use the cash from that to buy my new tiny house. based on a brief look at my financial situation, Paul seems to think that that's actually possible for me. So I'm buying a new tiny house. I can't believe it. I did not think, like 6 years ago, I was on major struggle street and living in the daggiest caravan you've ever seen. And now, as it turns out, I'm in a financial position to buy a brand new tiny house with sort of my own money in a kind of roundabout way, which means that I would have an investment property here. That blows my mind. Blows my mind. I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that I am actually in a position to buy a new tiny house. Me, like if the me could 6 years ago could see me now. So what's the next step? The next step is go shopping. It's a tricky one because it's July now. The Tiny House Industry Awards that I run is next month, and I do not want there to be any potential conflict of interest if I were to go shopping for a tiny house with one of the builders now and then miraculously they end up winning an award. That is not ideal, and I'm very much about transparency and integrity as much as humanly possible. So it means I'm going to have to wait until at the very least the end of next month in August, after the awards are done and tied up with a pretty little bow, to have conversations with builders, which is stressing me out because I would need to move, like this is going to have to happen sooner rather than later. I would need to move before Ryder's school year starts down the coast at the end of January, which gives me August, September, October, November, December, January, like 6 months to design, plan, get the mortgage sorted, find a parking spot, move, get him involved in school down there, find a tenant for my current property here, fix up a few things that might need to be done up before an actual like real tenant moves in. I'll get 6 months to do all that. But I kind of have to wait until the end of next month until the awards are done and then starting talking to builders. So now the pressure's on. Go, oh my God, who do I build with? I have my favorites, but now I guess I need to design it. Like before I go talk to builders, I sort of need to get the design first, don't I? It's so bizarre coming at it from this angle. Usually I'm advising other people on how to do this process. And now that it's me in that position of having to check all the boxes and line things up in a row, I normally advise people to get your build and design organized first. And then once you have signed on the dotted line with your builder and you've got a firm timeline, then you start your search for land. So it's nerve-wracking. I totally get that's nerve-wracking. And it's a big leap of faith, totally. So I wait till next month. I start talking to builders. But in the meantime, I'm going to sit down and work out a bit of a design and what I'm looking for in a tiny house. And maybe sort of walk you through the process a little bit on how to figure out what I need in the design, which will kind of dictate my budget, which will kind of dictate which builder I go to, really. So up next, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'll check in with you soon.